With me for some immediate reaction, I've got the Labor frontbencher Jason Clare for a previously organised interview, but we'll get to those matters in a moment. Sure. First of all, I want to ask you a question relating to this report card. Obviously, Australia not doing that great, but it follows 6 years of Labor in office. A lot of money spent on school halls, a lot of money spent on computers for schools. Was it all spent as effectively as it should be? And isn't it a report card more on Labor than it is on anything the coalition's done?
They're bad results, and they confirm what Gonski said, which is that we need to invest more in our schools and we need to invest it in the right areas. If you look at where unemployment is the highest in Australia, almost without exception, you'll find these are places where the school completion rates are low. And what Gonski is saying is you need to invest money in areas of disadvantage where there's high Indigenous populations, high levels of people from low SES backgrounds, from non-English speaking backgrounds. If you're going to lift people up in areas like mine, target the money in the right area. We said we'll inject $9 billion extra in to help lift up our kids and make sure that we've got the qualifications we need to compete in the Asian century. The Liberal Party don't want to do that. They only want to invest an extra $2 billion. Well, that's not enough.
Is the last 5 or 6 years, was that a missed opportunity in hindsight, particularly when we heard all of the grand rhetoric like the education revolution, and obviously didn't achieve what it was hoping to?
I'd say all of those things are important, and national curriculum, getting better data about how schools are going, but the funding model is still wrong. The old Howard funding model is broken, and we need a new funding model that invests in areas like mine where kids suffer great disadvantage when they start school, often don't even speak English when they start school, and they need more help if they're going to get the sort of results that we see in other parts of the country.
Okay, let's move on now to the temporary ban on protection visas. Scott Morrison is obviously not going to accept the Senate knocking off his and the government's mandate to reinstate temporary protection visas. And they do have a mandate, don't they?
Well, let's just take one step back, Kieran, so I can understand what's actually happening here. We introduced the PNG agreement, and it has made an enormous difference in stopping the boats. The week we announced it, 1,300 people came. In the last week before the election, only about 146. So there's been this massive drop. The government's terrified that in a year's time people look back and say, hang on, that PNG agreement stopped the boats. All of the other things they came up with, like turning back boats and buying boats, that's all come to nothing. They're grappling for something they promised so that in a year's time they can say, see, we stopped the boats. Well, the truth is that the PNG agreement, which says if you come to Australia without a visa, you get no visa. You go to PNG, not a temporary visa, not a permanent visa, no visa. And that is the clearest possible message that you can send up the pipeline to tell people, don't get on a boat and risk your life at sea.
So what about the 33,000 already here? Scott Morrison says he wants to send a message of intent to those peddling the people smuggling trade, that this government is going to be hardline across the board. And that includes the 33,000 already here.
Well, this is about deterrence. Stopping people that are thinking about getting on a boat. That is what this must be about. And the clearest way to do that is to say, if you get on a boat, you'll get no visa. The risk here is that you confuse the message and people think, hang on a second, I can get a temporary visa. People would be happy to get any sort of visa to come to Australia. We're the best country in the world. If a confused message goes up the pipeline and says, hang on, you can get visas to Australia again, then it could send the counter signal. We need to be clear. You come without a visa, you get no visa, you go to PNG, and if you're found to be someone who is genuinely seeking asylum, you live in PNG.
Well, it doesn't look like Labor's going to succeed in knocking off the temporary protection visas or effectively the government adopting that policy. Scott Morrison using the Migration Act and his powers in it to do what he's doing here. And I understand it. He's got other measures as well that we can expect that will implement the government's hardline policy.
Well, it's open to the minister to use whatever powers he has within his existing legislation. But he must make it very clear to people that if you're seeking to come to Australia by boat, without a visa, then you'll get no visa. The risk here is, before the election, the then opposition, now the government, indicated that some people that were transferred to Nauru or to PNG might end up being settled in Australia. Now, if this is a mechanism for giving those people a temporary protection visa in Australia, then that's a gap in their policy that they need to fix.
I don't think that that's the case. I think it just relates to the 33,000. I doubt it would extend. But anyway, let's move on. Julie Bishop heading to Indonesia. Talks tomorrow with Marty Natalegawa, the Indonesian Foreign Minister. You've had a bit to do with Indonesia in your former roles. What are the prospects of a resolution to this? Do you think the Indonesians and the nationalistic sentiment leading into parliamentary and presidential elections could preclude any swift resolution to this rift?
No, I don't. It shouldn't and it can't be allowed to. I've said to you a couple of weeks ago that we need to be proactive here. Don't let this fester. So the Foreign Minister going to Indonesia is an out-and-out good thing. I welcome that, and I wish her well in her discussions with the Indonesians. This relationship is too important to sour, and so the discussions she has over the next few days are very important. There's no better way to deal with an issue like this than face-to-face.
Now, the ASIO raid that we heard Bill Shorten asked about, should the opposition be demanding more information on this? I know Kelvin Thompson, at least, has expressed his concern. One of your Labor colleagues, Adam Bant, says that if these are proven correct, the situation around this ASIO raid, that George Brandis thinks he's J. Edgar Hoover throwing warrants around like confetti.
Well, we have asked for a briefing. The Leader of the Opposition has asked for a briefing. I make no immediate judgment about this. As Acting Attorney General, Kieran, I've had to sign off ASIO warrants, and you seek a lot of information from ASIO in writing and in person. I expect that the Attorney General has done that in this case, but it's up to him and ASIO to explain that in detail.
And you want to see that detail, the opposition?
We are entitled under the law to seek a briefing and receive a briefing, and that's what the Leader of the Opposition's asked for.
And finally, I want to ask you about Corey Bernardi has called for the structural separation of the ABC and its funding to be cut. The Prime Minister's also said that they showed very, very poor judgment in that broadcasting of the Snowden matter. What's your view on first of all, the reporting of that matter, and subsequently this claim from Senator Bernardi?
Well, let me deal with them in the opposite direction, if you don't mind, Kieran. On cuts, Corey Bernardi's called for the ABC to be cut. Tony Abbott yesterday in his press conference said that there'd be no cuts to the ABC. So if in the budget in May the ABC is cut, that's another broken promise. That's another lie from the Prime Minister, and we would hold him to account for that if he cuts the ABC's budget. More broadly, what I would say is we've got a free press, and sometimes the press say things we don't like, but there's no use whinging about it. You've got to go on and do your job. Last December, there was a big story broke on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age about customs corruption at Sydney Airport. Now, Tony Abbott's criticism has been not that the story about Indonesia was broken by the ABC, but they promoted it. Well, the ABC did exactly the same in this case here, working with Fairfax, who won a Walkley Award for this last week, promoted this story about corruption at Sydney Airport. I was the minister responsible at the time. My job then was to get in.
It's a bit different though, isn't it? Because that relates to corruption of one of our agencies. This relates to our foreign interests.
What I'm saying is, when you have a situation like this, what do? I got in and dealt with it. I appointed Justice James Wood to head up the Reform Board. I built a blueprint to reform the organisation that, to the credit of this government, is now implementing that reform. But it's your job as a minister to take responsibility for these things and fix it, not whinge. And this is the problem I'm seeing here with the Prime Minister. When he's upset about something, he's acting like a bully who's upset in the playground and throws a tantrum. Oh, the Parliament's going to sit longer, or I'm going to complain about the ABC. It harks back to the sort of bullying we saw in Tony Abbott long before he became Prime Minister. He's been kept in a box for the last few years, but now we're starting to see the ugly bully come back, and that's writ large in his activities over the last few weeks here in Parliament.
Jason Clare, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.